Welcome to Creepy Horror Tales. I'm so glad you're here. This channel is your go-to spot for spine-chilling stories that thrill and captivate. While our tales may be scary and spooky, they're also perfect for those moments when you want to relax and embrace a little excitement. So, settle in, let the eerie atmosphere wash over you, and enjoy the delightful chills that await. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there. A soft, breathy sound like someone standing just behind me, whispering my name. My whole body went cold. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but the whisper kept going, getting louder, more insistent. My name, over and over until it was practically a hiss. I didn't dare turn around. I just stood there, frozen, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The whisper stopped as suddenly as it started, and for a few seconds, there was silence again. But then I felt it, this heavy, cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, ready to scream, but there was no one there. Just the empty room, dimly lit by the moonlight seeping in through the small window near the ceiling. I was breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that my mind was just playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next day, I tried to ask Dr. Mercer about the rules, hoping he'd laugh it off and tell me it was just some kind of initiation prank. But he just looked at me with those same cold eyes and said, "The rules are there for a reason. Don't break them." And that was it. He wouldn't say anything more. I tried to brush it off, but things only got worse from there. Every night, I'd hear those whispers, faint at first, but they'd get louder, more urgent, almost like they were trying to tell me something. I started noticing things too, shadows that didn't make sense, cold spots that would come and go. And then, one night, I made the mistake of breaking the first rule. I was doing my rounds, just going about things, trying to keep my head down and get through the night. I was tired, so tired actually, that I didn't realize I was leaning over one of the bodies on the table. It was this older man, thin and pale, with that empty, drained look that every corpse has. I'd seen dozens of bodies by then, so I wasn't thinking much about it. But then, without really meaning to, I looked right into his eyes. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was just zoning out, or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that the rules didn't mean anything. But whatever the reason, I looked, and right away, I knew I'd made a mistake. His eyes were cloudy, that milky gray you see in the dead. But there was something else in them. Something that felt wrong. They were empty, but not in the usual way. It was like staring into a hole that went on forever, like those eyes were pulling me in, and I couldn't look away. My mind was screaming at me to turn away, but my body wouldn't listen. I just kept staring deeper and deeper until I felt like I was falling. And then he blinked. I could feel my heart stop. I knew it was impossible, that it couldn't have happened. But I saw it clear as day, his eyelids closing, then opening again. His eyes were fixed on me, watching me, almost like he was waiting for something. I stumbled back, breaking the stair, and fell against the wall, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep them still. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and stressed, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were still watching me, even when I turned away. I kept glancing back, expecting to see him sitting up or moving, but he was just lying there as still as ever. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see his face, those dead, gray eyes staring back at me, unblinking. I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination, just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew I'd broken the rule and something had changed. The next few nights, things got worse. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling every corner of the room. I'd feel that same cold hand on my shoulder, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. But every time I turned around, there'd be no one there. Just the shadows, stretching and shifting, like they were alive. Then came the night when I broke the third rule. I didn't mean to, it just sort of slipped out. I was talking to myself, trying to calm down, and before I realized it, I'd said the name of the last body processed, Andrew Hale. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I tried to find a light switch, but no matter how hard I fumbled, I couldn't find it. It was like the room had shifted, like everything had moved just out of reach. And then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Why did you call my name?" I froze. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel something there, something moving closer. The air was thick, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to get out of that room, and never look back, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost a growl. "Why did you call my name?" I forced myself to turn, to look toward the sound, even though I knew I'd regret it. And there, in the faint glow of the emergency exit light, I saw him. Andrew Hale, the man I'd processed earlier. He was standing there, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones, his eyes fixed on me with that same empty, hungry look. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him, too terrified to move. His lips curled into a twisted smile, and he took a step toward me, his bony hand reaching out. I could see every vein, every bone, every sinew in that hand like it was barely held together. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there. A soft, breathy sound like someone standing just behind me, whispering my name. My whole body went cold. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but the whisper kept going, getting louder, more insistent. My name, over and over until it was practically a hiss. I didn't dare turn around. I just stood there, frozen, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The whisper stopped as suddenly as it started, and for a few seconds, there was silence again. But then I felt it, this heavy, cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, ready to scream, but there was no one there. Just the empty room, dimly lit by the moonlight seeping in through the small window near the ceiling. I was breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that my mind was just playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next day, I tried to ask Dr. Mercer about the rules, hoping he'd laugh it off and tell me it was just some kind of initiation prank. But he just looked at me with those same cold eyes and said, "The rules are there for a reason. Don't break them." And that was it. He wouldn't say anything more. I tried to brush it off, but things only got worse from there. Every night, I'd hear those whispers, faint at first, but they'd get louder, more urgent, almost like they were trying to tell me something. I started noticing things too, shadows that didn't make sense, cold spots that would come and go. And then, one night, I made the mistake of breaking the first rule. I was doing my rounds, just going about things, trying to keep my head down and get through the night. I was tired, so tired actually, that I didn't realize I was leaning over one of the bodies on the table. It was this older man, thin and pale, with that empty, drained look that every corpse has. I'd seen dozens of bodies by then, so I wasn't thinking much about it. But then, without really meaning to, I looked right into his eyes. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was just zoning out, or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that the rules didn't mean anything. But whatever the reason, I looked, and right away, I knew I'd made a mistake. His eyes were cloudy, that milky gray you see in the dead. But there was something else in them. Something that felt wrong. They were empty, but not in the usual way. It was like staring into a hole that went on forever, like those eyes were pulling me in, and I couldn't look away. My mind was screaming at me to turn away, but my body wouldn't listen. I just kept staring deeper and deeper until I felt like I was falling. And then he blinked. I could feel my heart stop. I knew it was impossible, that it couldn't have happened. But I saw it clear as day, his eyelids closing, then opening again. His eyes were fixed on me, watching me, almost like he was waiting for something. I stumbled back, breaking the stair, and fell against the wall, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep them still. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and stressed, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were still watching me, even when I turned away. I kept glancing back, expecting to see him sitting up or moving, but he was just lying there as still as ever. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see his face, those dead, gray eyes staring back at me, unblinking. I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination, just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew I'd broken the rule and something had changed. The next few nights, things got worse. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling every corner of the room. I'd feel that same cold hand on my shoulder, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. But every time I turn around, there'd be no one there. Just the shadows, stretching and shifting, like they were alive. Then came the night when I broke the third rule. I didn't mean to, it just sort of slipped out. I was talking to myself, trying to calm down, and before I realized it, I'd said the name of the last body processed, Andrew Hale. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I tried to find a light switch, but no matter how hard I fumbled, I couldn't find it. It was like the room had shifted, like everything had moved just out of reach. And then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Why did you call my name?" I froze. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel something there, something moving closer. The air was thick, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to get out of that room and never look back, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost a growl. "Why did you call my name?" I forced myself to turn, to look toward the sound, even though I knew I'd regret it. And there, in the faint glow of the emergency exit light, I saw him. Andrew Hale, the man I'd processed earlier that day. He was standing there, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones, his eyes fixed on me with that same empty, hungry look. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him, too terrified to move. His lips curled into a twisted smile, and he took a step toward me, his bony hand reaching out. I could see every vein, every bone, every sinew in that hand like it was barely held together. In a panic, I managed to break free from whatever hold had me rooted there. I stumbled back, slamming into one of the metal tables, the clatter echoing through the room. For a second, I thought I'd gotten away, but when I looked up, he was right there in front of me, so close I could feel his breath on my face. "You shouldn't have broken the rules," he hissed, his voice barely more than a whisper, but filled with a hatred so deep it cut through me like a knife. I scrambled back, knocking over a tray of instruments, the clinking metal filling the silence. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get out. I bolted toward the door, throwing it open and running down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, as fast as my legs would carry me, until I burst out of the morgue and into the cold night air. I stood there, gasping, looking back at the darkened building, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, empty night. I quit the next day, didn't even go back to get my things. I just walked out of there and never looked back. But even now, sometimes in the dead of night, I still hear those whispers. I still feel that cold hand on my shoulder, that icy breath on my neck. And I know he's still waiting for me, somewhere in the darkness, just waiting for the moment when I slip up when I call his name again. And I don't think he'll let me go a second time. After I left the morgue, I thought I could just bury it, pretend it was all just a bad experience, some kind of messed up nightmare I'd eventually forget. But I could never really shake it off. It's like the memory got stuck in my brain, replaying at the worst moments. Even during the day, I'd feel those icy fingers brush against my neck, like he was reaching out for me from wherever I left him. I tried telling people, friends mostly, just casually, hey, here's this weird thing that happened when I worked at the morgue, trying to make it sound like it was just another bad job story. But the looks they gave me, they didn't believe it, not really. How could they? Even saying it out loud felt ridiculous. Corpses don't get up and follow you. Rules like don't look in their eyes and don't say their name are things out of movies, not real life. So I stopped talking about it, tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But I couldn't convince myself. It was always there, lingering. I'd be falling asleep, thinking I was finally free from it all. And then I'd hear his voice, clear as anything, whispering, "Why did you call my name?" Sometimes it'd be so real I'd jump out of bed, flicking on every light in my apartment, just trying to find, well, something, even if I didn't want to admit what. It all came to a head one night, maybe 3 months after I quit. I was doing pretty well, even started thinking maybe I'd imagined more than I thought, that it was all just stress. But then, this one night, I'm heading to bed when the power in my apartment just cuts out. The entire building goes dark, and I'm standing there in the silence, frozen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting this weird, long shadow through the window. I waited for the power to come back, tried to tell myself it was probably just a blown fuse or something. But then, I saw it, a figure standing just outside my window, only partially visible through the thin, drawn curtain. I felt that familiar chill, the cold that seemed to crawl up from my feet and freeze every inch of me. I didn't want to look, didn't want to know who or what it was. But something made me reach out, and with a shaky hand, I slowly pulled the curtain aside. There he was, Andrew Hale, the same hollow, twisted face, those sunken eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He was just standing there outside my window on the 3rd floor, staring up at me with that twisted smile. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, just this dark, yawning emptiness that made my skin crawl. I stumbled back, fell against the wall, and for a second, I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a dead guy I processed months ago was standing outside my window? They'd throw me in a psych ward, and part of me wondered if that might actually be better. But the thing was, he wasn't outside for long. I blinked, and in that split second, he was gone. Just vanished like he'd never been there. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was a hallucination, some leftover trauma, or whatever. But then I heard it, the whisper, coming from the darkness of my own apartment. Why did you call my name? I felt like my heart was about to explode. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold my phone, but I managed to turn on the flashlight and aimed it into the room, praying it'd show nothing but empty space. The light hit nothing at first, just the dull walls of my apartment. But as I swept it across the room, the beam landed on a figure standing in the corner. Andrew, just standing there, his head tilted at this unnatural angle, that same twisted grin spreading across his face. His eyes, they were different, darker somehow, filled with something I can only describe as hunger. Why did you call my name? He repeated, his voice low, almost guttural, each word drawn out like it was some kind of chant. He took a step forward, and I swear I could feel the floor vibrate under his weight, like he was more real, more solid than he had any right to be. I backed up, tripping over my own feet, the flashlight shaking wildly in my hand. I knew I couldn't just stand there, but I couldn't move either. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, but it was like all my thoughts were tangled up in panic. I wanted to scream, to run, but it was like my body had forgotten how to work. He took another step, and I could hear his breaths now, slow, wheezing, each one like a broken whistle in the silence of the room. He was getting closer, inch by inch, and I could see every little detail of his face. The stretched skin, the sunken cheeks, the empty, hollow eyes. Finally, some kind of survival instinct kicked in, and I scrambled to my feet, bolting toward the door. I threw it open, practically flying down the stairs and out into the street, not even thinking about where I was going, just trying to put as much distance as possible between me and that room. I ended up at a diner down the block, the only place open that late. I must have looked like a wreck because the waitress gave me this strange look, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere safe, somewhere with people. I sat there all night, nursing a cup of coffee, jumping at every shadow, every flicker of movement. Eventually, morning came, and I knew I had to go back. I couldn't avoid it forever, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. But when I got back to my apartment, everything looked normal. No sign of Andrew, no strange shadows, nothing out of place. For a second, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I saw it. Right there on my mirror, scrawled in what looked like ash or soot, were 4 words. Why did you call me? I didn't stick around to find out if he'd come back. I packed a bag, grabbed whatever cash I had, and left. I moved halfway across the country, didn't tell anyone where I was going. Figured distance was the only thing that might help, you know? and for a while it did. The whispers stopped, the shadows faded, and I started to think maybe I'd finally escaped him. But every now and then, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Just a shadow, maybe, or a flicker of movement that disappears when I turn to look. And in those moments, I hear it again, faint but clear, like he's whispering right in my ear. "Why did you call my name?" And that's when I realize I don't think I'll ever really be free of him. The new place I'd moved to was a small town far enough away that I thought I'd finally left Andrew and all of it behind. It was quiet, nothing like the city. I got a room above an old hardware store run by an older couple who hardly spoke and mostly kept to themselves. The room was small, but it was safe. At least, I convinced myself it was. The first few weeks, I stayed alert, listening for any sign of him. Every creak, every draft that sent a chill down my spine. I'd freeze, waiting for that voice, the cold touch of his fingers on my shoulder. But it never came. Gradually, I started to relax. I started thinking I'd outrun him. Finally, I began sleeping again, even dreaming, sometimes without him haunting the edges of my mind. For a moment, I thought I was free, but then things started happening again, small at first. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and my room would be cold, even though it was the middle of summer. I'd shrug it off, tell myself it was just the building settling or the old plumbing acting up. But deep down, I felt the dread creeping back in, that familiar feeling I'd tried so hard to bury. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, fighting off the same old memories when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere close. It was soft, barely audible, like someone gently dragging their nails along the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it kept going, this slow, relentless scratching that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, grabbed a flashlight, and started scanning the room, trying to find the source. My hand was trembling as I aimed the beam of light along the walls, searching for something, anything that could explain the noise. But there was nothing, just empty walls and silence. I was about to get back into bed, convincing myself it was just rats or something, when I noticed it, for words, etched faintly into the pane on the wall, right next to my bed. "Why did you call me?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew those words, knew them better than anything by now. I stumbled back, barely able to keep myself standing, and that's when I felt it, that cold, familiar hand on my shoulder pressing down like a reminder. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. It was like every part of me was frozen, locked in place by that icy grip. And then I heard his voice, so close it felt like he was breathing right into my ear. "Why did you call my name?" I broke free, practically throwing myself across the room, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I kept the flashlight trained on the spot where I'd seen the writing, but when I looked again, it was gone. Just a blank wall, as if nothing had ever been there. I told myself I was imagining, that I'd let the memories get to me. But that icy feeling, that cold hand, I couldn't shake it off. The next few days, I was a wreck. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, barely left my room. I kept expecting him to show up, waiting for that whisper, that cold touch. But he didn't. It was like he was toying with me, letting me think I was safe before pulling me back in. And then came the night when I saw him again. I was coming back from a late shift at the diner where I'd picked up work, just trying to make ends meet. It was around 2 in the morning, the streets empty, the town dead quiet. I was walking down the street, feeling that same old paranoia creeping up on me when I saw him. He was standing under a street lamp, half hidden in the shadows, his face tilted just enough that I could see his eyes, dark and empty, fixed right on me. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching like he'd been waiting for me all along. I froze, unable to look away, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. For a second, I thought about running, about turning around and sprinting back the way I'd come. But I knew he'd follow. He always did, so I did the only thing I could think of. I took a step toward him. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I was tired of running, or maybe I thought confronting him might make him go away. But as I got closer, I realized just how wrong I was. His face, it wasn't right. It was pale and stretched, the skin too tight, the bones visible beneath, almost like he was decaying. But his eyes, they were alive, fixed on me with this hunger I couldn't understand. I stopped a few feet away, barely able to breathe, my legs shaking so bad I thought they'd give out. And then he spoke. "You shouldn't have called me." His voice was cold, flat, with this bitterness that cut through me like a knife. I wanted to respond, to tell him I hadn't called him, that it was all a mistake, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from him. "You called me," he said again, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. "And now you can't get rid of me." I stumbled back, my hands trembling, my mind racing. I could feel my throat tightening, my skin crawling, like something inside me was breaking down. And then he reached out, his fingers brushing against my arm, and I felt it. The same cold that had haunted me for months, sinking into my skin, deeper than ever. "Please," I managed to choke out, though I didn't even know what I was begging for. Forgiveness? Freedom? Maybe just an end to this nightmare. But he just smiled, this hollow, twisted smile that made my skin crawl. "There's no please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You called me, and now you're mine." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I collapsed right there on the street, shaking, gasping for air. I didn't know what had just happened, or what it meant. All I knew was that he wasn't going to leave. He'd be back, and next time, I might not be so lucky. After that, I tried everything. I moved again, to another state this time. Changed my name, stopped talking to anyone from my old life. I even went to a church, desperate for some kind of solution, something that might break the hold he had over me. But it didn't work. Nothing did. Every time I think I'm safe, he finds me. Every time I start to believe I've escaped, I see those words scrawled on a wall or whispered in the darkness. "Why did you call me?" I don't know how much longer I can keep running. He's wearing me down, bit by bit, breaking me in ways I didn't even know were possible. And I can feel him getting closer, feel that cold creeping back into my life, stronger than before. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's a confession. All I know is that somehow he's still here. Even as I type this, I can feel him watching me, waiting for the moment I slip up, for the moment I let my guard down. So, if you're reading this, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't call his name. Don't break the rules. Because once he's with you, there's no getting rid of him. After writing everything down, I thought maybe I could finally let it go, like maybe putting it into words would somehow exorcise him from my life. But in the days that followed, it only got worse. It was like he could feel the fear I'd put into the story, feeding off it, getting stronger with every line. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel him there, hovering just beyond the edge of my mind, waiting. I'd catch glimpses of him in my dreams, his hollow eyes staring at me from the darkness, his twisted grin stretched across that pale, lifeless face. But he never spoke, never moved, just watched like he was waiting for something. Or maybe like he was getting closer. One night, about a week after I wrote everything down, I woke up to find my apartment cold. I'm talking freezing, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. I sat up, pulling the covers tighter around me, trying to shake off the feeling. But it wasn't just the cold. It was the silence, the kind of silence that wraps around you, heavy and thick, pressing in on all sides. And then I heard it, a faint, raspy whisper coming from somewhere in the room. "Why did you call me?" My heart stopped. I told myself it was just a dream, that I was still half asleep. But then I heard it again, louder this time, coming from just beside the bed. "Why did you call my name?" I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My mind was screaming at me to get up, to run, but my body was paralyzed, locked in place by fear. Slowly, I turned my head, dreading what I'd see. And there he was, standing right beside my bed, his face inches from mine, those hollow eyes staring straight into me. He was closer than ever before. I could see every crease in his pale skin, the dark circles under his eyes, the faint, almost decayed smell that clung to him. His mouth opened, and I could see the dark emptiness inside, stretching into an endless void. "You called me," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, yet it filled the room, echoing off the walls. "And now I'm here." I wanted to scream, to get up and run, but I was frozen, trapped in his gaze, sinking deeper and deeper into those empty, hollow eyes. His hand reached out, cold fingers brushing against my cheek, and I could feel my skin prickling under his touch, like ice seeping into my veins. "You can't escape," he said, his voice a low, rumbling whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You called me, and now you're mine." I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was lying on the floor, curled up in a ball, my body drenched in cold sweat. I stumbled to my feet, barely able to keep myself upright, and looked around the room, half expecting to see him standing there. But it was empty, just me alone in the silence. But I knew he was still there. I could feel him, lingering just beyond sight, watching, waiting. I knew he'd be back. It was only a matter of time. That day, I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. I packed a bag with whatever I could fit, threw on a coat, and left without looking back. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away, put as much distance as I could between me and that place. I ended up wandering for hours, drifting from one place to another, too scared to settle down anywhere. Every time I stopped, I'd feel that same cold creeping in, that heavy silence pressing down on me, and I'd keep moving, hoping he wouldn't follow. I spent the next few weeks like that, moving from town to town, sleeping in cheap motels or on park benches, never staying in one place for more than a day. But no matter where I went, he was always there, lurking in the shadows, just out of sight, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Eventually, I ended up in a small town out in the middle of nowhere, a place so quiet and isolated that I figured maybe he couldn't find me here. I rented a room in a rundown motel, told myself it was only temporary, just until I could figure out what to do next. The first night was quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel his presence. I didn't hear his voice, didn't see him lurking in the shadows. It was almost peaceful, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd finally lost him. But then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I felt it, that cold, familiar hand on my shoulder, pressing down, pulling me back into the darkness. I opened my eyes, and there he was standing over me, his hollow eyes staring into mine, that twisted smile spreading across his face. "Why did you call me?" he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, yet it filled the room, drowning out everything else. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, paralyzed, helpless under his gaze. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, and I could feel his cold breath on my skin, the decayed smell filling my nostrils. "You can't run," he said, his voice low and cold. "You're mine now." I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that when I woke up, I was lying on the motel floor, covered in scratches and bruises, my body aching like I'd been beaten. I stumbled to my feet, barely able to keep myself upright, and looked around the room. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled in what looked like ashes or soot. For words, repeated over and over again. "Why did you call me?" I left that motel as fast as I could, didn't even bother to pack my things. I just ran, barely able to think, my mind racing, heart pounding. I knew I couldn't keep running forever, knew he'd find me no matter where I went. But I didn't have a choice. I had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of him, even if it meant never stopping, never resting. I don't know how long I can keep this up. He's getting closer, stronger. Each time he finds me, I can feel him now, even as I write this, hovering just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for the moment I slip up. So if you're reading this, if you found my story, heed my warning. Don't break the rules. Don't look into their eyes. Don't say their name. And whatever you do, don't call them. Because once they're with you, there's no escape. No running, no hiding. It's been months since I last rode. Since then, things have only gotten worse. I can't keep running. I'm worn down, like every step is getting harder. Every breath feels like it's caught in my throat. And every night, he finds me. No matter how far I go, no matter how many towns I pass through, he's always there, just waiting for me to let my guard down. I try talking to people about it again, just testing the waters, dropping hints here and there. But the looks they give me, like they can't believe someone would say something so crazy, it just makes it worse. It's like being trapped in a nightmare that no one else can see, no one else can even imagine. I'm alone in this, completely alone. But tonight something changed. It was different this time. Usually, it's just him, just Andrew with those hollow, hungry eyes, staring at me from the shadows, whispering the same question, asking why I called him. But tonight, there was something else. Something more. I was holed up in another nameless motel. This one even worse than the last. I didn't bother unpacking my things, just dropped my bag on the floor and locked myself in, shoving the dresser in front of the door just in case. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. Makes you wonder if you'll ever feel rested again. I lay down on the bed, hoping for just a few hours of peace, just a short break from the endless chase. And that's when I heard it, the whisper. But it wasn't coming from the corner of the room or from behind me. This time it was coming from the mirror. I sat up, staring at my reflection, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains, casting strange shadows across the walls. But in the mirror, I saw him. Andrew, standing just behind me, his pale, twisted face looming over my shoulder, his eyes fixed on mine. And this time, he wasn't alone. There was another figure, barely visible, standing in the shadows just beyond the mirror's edge. I could only make out the outline, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with limbs that seemed too long, fingers stretched out like claws, reaching toward me. Its face was hidden in darkness, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and piercing, like it was staring straight into my soul. "Why did you call me?" Andrew whispered, his voice colder than ever, filled with a hunger that sent a jolt of fear through me. I wanted to look away, to break the gaze, but I couldn't. I was trapped, locked in the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with those hollow, lifeless eyes, even though I knew I wasn't moving. And then, slowly, the tall figure in the shadows stepped forward, its face coming into view. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. Its skin was stretched tight over its skull, gray and mottled, like it had been rotting for years. Its mouth was twisted into a jagged smile, teeth sharp and yellow. And its eyes, they were empty, just dark pits, like holes that went on forever. But in those empty sockets, I could see something moving, like shadows shifting, twisting, reaching out. The figure leaned closer, its face inches from mine, and I could feel its cold breath on my skin, smell the decay that clung to it like a second skin. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, it spoke. "You called us," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the room. "And now we're here." My heart stopped. I could feel my whole body freezing up, the air thick with a cold that seemed to seep into my bones, weighing me down, making it impossible to move. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break free from their gaze. But I was trapped, held in place by their eyes, by the weight of their presence. And then, slowly, they started to move closer, their faces inches from mine, their cold, clammy hands reaching out, wrapping around my shoulders, my arms, pulling me deeper into the mirror, into the darkness. I could feel their fingers digging into my skin, cold and sharp, like they were trying to pull me apart, piece by piece. I don't know how I managed to break free, but somehow I did. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed, hitting the floor hard. The impact snapped me out of it, just for a moment, long enough to scramble to my feet, my heart racing, my breaths coming in short, panic gasps. I looked up at the mirror, half expecting to see them standing there, staring back at me. But the reflection was empty. Just me, standing there alone, my face pale, my eyes wide with terror. But I knew it wasn't over. They were still there, lurking just beyond the edge of the mirror, waiting for the moment I let my guard down, for the moment I looked into their eyes again. I could feel them, even now, watching me from the darkness, their whispers filling the room, echoing off the walls, growing louder with every passing second. "Why did you call us?" they chanted, their voices blending together, a twisted, haunting symphony that filled my mind, drowning out everything else. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're getting closer, stronger, with every encounter. It's like they're feeding off my fear, growing more real, more solid with every moment that passes. And I know that one day, they'll catch me. One day, I'll slip up, and they'll be there, waiting to drag me into the darkness, into the endless void that lies beyond their hollow eyes. So if you're reading this, if you found this story, take it as a warning. Don't call them. Don't look into their eyes. Don't speak their names. Because once they're with you, there's no escape. No running, no hiding. They'll find you, no matter where you go, no matter how far you run. They'll find you, and when they do, you'll become one of them. And you'll spend eternity in the darkness, forever trapped in their hollow, lifeless gaze. I left the motel the next morning, barely holding myself together. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying a weight that only got worse with each passing day. I was running on fumes, moving from town to town, sometimes hitchhiking, sometimes walking for miles when I couldn't bring myself to trust another driver. I just tell myself that if I kept moving, if I kept running, maybe I could shake them. Maybe I'd find somewhere they couldn't reach me. But in my gut, I knew the truth. There was nowhere I could hide. Nowhere far enough, quiet enough, or safe enough to get away from them. I kept seeing their reflections everywhere. Mirrors, windows, even in puddles on the street after it rained. They'd be there, staring back at me, silent and waiting. And each time, I'd feel a little piece of myself slipping away, like they were feeding off me, bit by bit, every time I saw them. One night, I ended up in this tiny roadside diner in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't eaten in days. Not that I'd had much of an appetite with everything going on, but I figured a coffee, maybe something solid in my stomach, might ground me a bit, might bring me back to reality, if that's even what it was anymore. I found a booth near the back, away from the other customers, and kept my head down, barely making eye contact with the waitress as she took my order. I didn't want to talk, didn't want anyone to notice me. I just wanted to be alone, to sit in silence for once without them staring back at me. But the peace didn't last long. As I sipped my coffee, I felt a chill run down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew, without even looking, that they were there. Slowly, I looked up, and my eyes landed on the large, wall-length mirror at the back of the diner. They were there in the reflection, sitting in the booth across from me. Andrew was in the center, his lifeless eyes fixed on me, while the shadowed figure from my motel room loomed beside him, half hidden in darkness. And behind them, more figures were emerging, their hollow, empty faces forming a line, stretching back into the darkness of the mirror, as if they were gathering, waiting for something. I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't even move. Then, in unison, they all spoke, their voices a twisted chorus that echoed through my mind, drowning out every other sound. "You called us? You can't run." I blinked, and the reflection was empty. Just me, staring back at myself, pale and shaken, my coffee cup shaking in my hand. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that it was just another hallucination. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. They were getting closer, stronger, slipping further into my reality, and I was powerless to stop it. That night, I checked into another cheap motel, this one with no mirrors, no reflective surfaces at all. I figured if I couldn't see them, maybe they couldn't see me either. I blocked the windows with old sheets I found in the closet, covered every reflective surface I could find. But as I lay in the dark, the silence pressing down on me, I heard it again. That same scratching coming from the walls, growing louder, more frantic, as if they were trying to claw their way inside. I stayed up all night, sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching my knees, watching the walls, waiting for them to break through. But morning came, and the scratching stopped, leaving me in an eerie silence that was almost worse. Over the next few days, I noticed the signs more and more often. Shadows in my peripheral vision, strange figures watching me from windows, whispers that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Every night, I'd hear them, that same twisted chorus, repeating the same words, growing louder, more insistent. You called us. You can't hide. One night, exhausted and desperate, I found myself in a small-town library, researching anything I could find about hauntings, curses, whatever this might be. I pored over dusty old books, obscure websites, forums where people shared their own stories of the paranormal. But none of it helped. I couldn't find anything that explained what was happening, anything that could tell me how to make it stop. And then, as I was about to give up, I found a small, faded notebook hidden behind a stack of books on an old shelf. It was bound in cracked leather, the pages yellowed with age, filled with handwritten notes in a shaky, barely legible script. As I flipped through it, one word jumped out at me, scrawled across nearly every page. Callers. My heart raced as I read through the notebook, the words becoming more erratic, more frantic, the handwriting nearly illegible by the end. The author wrote about people who had called things they couldn't control, things that followed them, haunted them, consumed them. They wrote about rules, about reflections, about voices in the night that grew louder and louder until they drowned out everything else. But there was one line that caught my eye, one line scrawled across the last page in large, desperate letters. The only way to end it is to answer. I didn't know what it meant. Answer what? I hadn't called them. I didn't even know how. But as I read those words, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in months. If answering was the only way, then maybe that was what they wanted. Maybe that was why they kept coming back, why they were getting closer every time I ran. So that night, back in the motel room, I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited for them. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall across from me, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, I spoke. I'm here. I'm ready to listen. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence, thick and oppressive, wrapping around me like a shroud. But then, slowly, I felt it, a cold, creeping presence filling the room, pressing down on me from all sides. I could feel their eyes on me, could hear their whispers, growing louder, filling my mind until I could barely think. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a breath, I heard him, Andrew, speaking directly into my ear, his voice low and cold, filled with a hatred that made my skin crawl. You called us, and now you're ours. The words echoed through my mind, over and over, drowning out everything else. I felt myself slipping, sinking into darkness, my vision blurring, my body going numb. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to something, anything, but it was like they were pulling me apart piece by piece, dragging me into the void. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, fragments of memories that don't quite make sense. Cold hands reaching for me, hollow eyes staring back at me, voices whispering secrets I couldn't understand. And then darkness. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the motel room, my body aching, my mind foggy. I staggered to my feet, looking around, but the room was empty, just me alone in the silence. But something was different. I could feel it, a weight pressing down on me, a coldness that lingered, clinging to my skin like a second layer. I went to the mirror, half expecting to see them standing behind me. But all I saw was my own reflection, staring back at me with eyes that felt different. Darker, hollow. I don't know what happened that night. Don't know what I answered or what I agreed to. But I know one thing. They're still with me. I can feel them, lurking just beneath the surface, whispering in the back of my mind, filling my thoughts with darkness. And every night, as I lie in bed, I hear them, their voices blending into a twisted lullaby, a reminder of what I've become, of what I can never escape. You called us, they whisper, their voices soft and haunting. And now, you're one of us. And that's when I realize I didn't escape them. I became them. Now, I'm part of the darkness, forever trapped in their hollow, lifeless gaze. And someday, when someone else calls, I'll be waiting. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that things settled down after I joined them, or whatever it is that happened that night. But that would be too easy. See, I thought it was over, that by accepting them, by allowing myself to be claimed, I'd finally found peace. But it wasn't peace. It was something much worse. After that night, I started feeling strange, almost like I was living outside myself, watching my own life from a distance. I could go about my day, act normal, even hold a conversation, but it was like there was this other part of me, something dark and cold, just waiting, just watching. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and not recognize myself. My eyes seemed different, darker, emptier, like something had drained the life out of them. My own reflection would stare back at me, unblinking, as if something else was looking through my eyes. Noticed too, friends, family. They'd look at me with this uncomfortable expression, like they sensed something was wrong, but didn't know how to ask. My voice changed, becoming flatter, colder, lacking the warmth it used to have. And the worst part? I couldn't even feel afraid anymore. It was like the fear, the panic, had been leached out of me, leaving this empty numbness behind. I was a hollow shell, filled with a darkness I didn't understand, a darkness that was waiting for something I couldn't name. One night, I was alone in my apartment, flipping through an old photo album, trying to feel something, anything that might remind me of who I used to be. But as I looked at the pictures, my face staring back at me from different moments in my life, I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger, like those memories belonged to someone else. And then, in the silence of the room, I heard it again, the whisper. You called us, and now it's your turn. I froze, my fingers gripping the photo album, so hard the pages crumpled. I'd thought the voices were gone, thought that accepting them had somehow ended the nightmare. But they weren't gone. They were still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. In the days that followed, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just Andrew's voice anymore. It was a chorus, a twisted symphony of voices, each one different, each one filled with a hatred and bitterness that made my skin crawl. They spoke in fragments, half-sentences, memories that didn't belong to me, things I couldn't understand. And every night, as I lay in bed, they'd surround me, filling the room with their whispers, reminding me of what I'd become, of what was waiting for me. You called us, they'd chant, their voices blending together, echoing through my mind. And now, you're one of us? The worst part was the reflection. Whenever I looked in the mirror, I'd see their faces behind mine, just out of focus, hovering like ghosts, their hollow eyes staring back at me, waiting. Sometimes they'd be smiling, their twisted grins stretching across their pale, decaying faces, as if they knew something I didn't. And then, one night, I saw it, an unfamiliar face in the mirror, standing right behind me, so close I could feel the cold radiating from it. I turned around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, silent and still. But when I looked back in the mirror, the face was still there, watching me, waiting. It was a woman, her skin gray and stretched tight over her bones, her eyes empty and lifeless, her mouth twisted into a mocking smile. And then, in a voice that sent chills down my spine, she whispered, "It's your turn." The next day, I started hearing the whispers even when I was awake. They'd follow me everywhere, at work, on the street, in the grocery store. I'd hear them in the hum of the air conditioner, in the rumble of passing cars, in the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Sometimes they'd be so loud I couldn't hear anything else, drowning out the world around me, filling my mind with their voices, with their anger, with their pain. And then one night, I realized what they wanted. They wanted me to call someone. They wanted me to pass on whatever curse had claimed me, to bring someone else into the darkness, just as I had been brought into it. That was the price, the way to keep them at bay. I had to find someone who'd listen, someone who'd believe, someone who'd answer. At first, I resisted. I told myself I couldn't do it, that I wouldn't condemn someone else to this nightmare. But the voices grew louder, angrier, filling my mind with a pressure that felt like it would crack me open. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It was like they were inside me, clawing their way through my thoughts, demanding to be heard. And then one night I broke. I sat in front of my computer, staring at the blank screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know what to write, didn't know how to explain what I'd been through. But as the voices screamed in my mind, as their whispers filled the room, I started typing. The words poured out of me, a story I barely recognized, a confession I didn't understand. I wrote about Andrew, about the rules, about the darkness that had claimed me, the voices that wouldn't leave me alone. When I finished, I stared at the screen, reading over the words, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like they'd been written by someone else. I knew what I had to do. I had to send it, had to put it out there, had to pass it on. It was the only way to quiet the voices, to make them stop. So I posted it. I sent it out into the world, hoping that someone somewhere would read it, would answer, would call them. And for a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, the voices went silent. The room was quiet, the air still, and I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd finally done what they wanted. But that relief didn't last, because as I sat there, staring at the screen, I felt it, a presence cold and dark, filling the room, pressing down on me from all sides. I looked up, and in the mirror I saw them, all of them, standing behind me, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their twisted smiles stretching across their faces. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, they spoke. "It's your turn." I tried to look away, tried to break free, but I was trapped, held in their gaze, sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness, into the void that lay behind their eyes. And in that moment, I understood. I passed it on, yes. I'd sent my story out into the world, hoping to free myself, to escape. But the darkness doesn't let go that easily. It doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. And now, I am one of them. So if you're reading this, if you've made it this far, take this as your warning. Don't look into their eyes. Don't call their names. And whatever you do, don't answer. Because if you do, they'll come for you, just as they came for me. They'll haunt your dreams, fill your thoughts, drag you into the darkness, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of you but an empty shell, a hollow reflection staring back from the mirror. And when that happens, you'll be just like me. Another face in the darkness. Another whisper in the void, waiting for someone else to call. I thought that sending out the story, sharing my experience, would end things. But instead, it only opened a door I can't close. Since the night I posted that story, I've felt them more than ever, their presence around me constantly. They're not just shadows and mirrors or whispers in the dark anymore. They're here in the room with me every second, and I can feel them getting closer. The night after I posted, I tried to sleep, but it was useless. Every time I shut my eyes, I'd feel something brushing against my skin, cold and clammy, like a hand reaching out from the dark, pulling me in. I'd bolt upright, drenched in sweat, only to see them, dozens of hollow faces surrounding my bed, each one watching, waiting. And every time, their mouths would open, whispering the same thing over and over. "It's your turn." I stopped trying to sleep after that. I'd sit up all night, staring at the walls, watching for any movement, feeling their eyes on me. The room would grow colder and darker, the shadows creeping closer until they were practically swallowing me whole. I'd hear their voices, echoing in my mind, filling the silence until it was deafening. Then one night it happened. I was sitting at my desk, exhausted but unable to close my eyes, when the lights began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just a power surge, something easily explained. But the flickering continued, growing more erratic, like something was messing with the electricity, feeding off it. The light finally died, plunging the room into darkness. I grabbed my phone, using it as a flashlight, the small beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of faces, half hidden in the darkness, staring back at me, their hollow eyes glowing faintly, like embers barely holding on to life. I knew there was no escaping this time. They had me, and I was trapped. "Why did you call us?" they whispered, their voices blending together, creating a chorus that shook me to my core. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to reason with them. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, locked in their gaze, sinking deeper into the darkness with each passing second. Then, from the midst of the shadows, Andrew stepped forward, his face as pale and lifeless as ever, his hollow eyes fixed on me with a look of almost amusement. Like he'd been waiting for this moment, savoring it, knowing it was inevitable. "You thought you could escape," he whispered, his voice soft but filled with a cold, biting hatred. "But once you called, there was no going back." I wanted to beg, to plead, to tell him that I didn't mean to, that it was all a mistake. But I couldn't. I just stood there, my body frozen, my mind drowning in fear, unable to form a single coherent thought. "You called us," he continued, his voice dripping with malice. "And now, you belong to us?" I felt a hand grab my shoulder, ice cold and unforgiving, the grip tightening until I could feel the bones pressing into my skin. Another hand wrapped around my arm, then another on my neck, each one colder than the last, pulling me down, dragging me deeper into the darkness. I struggled, trying to break free, but their grip was too strong, their fingers like iron, unyielding and relentless. As they pulled me down, I felt myself slipping away, my thoughts scattering, my memories fading, like they were draining me, piece by piece. I could feel the life leaving my body, my consciousness unraveling, dissolving into the shadows. And in that moment, I knew what they wanted. They weren't just taking me. They were making me one of them. I don't know how long it lasted. Time seemed to stretch, seconds turning into minutes, minutes into hours. I was lost, floating in a sea of darkness, surrounded by whispers, each one echoing through my mind, filling me with their hatred, their bitterness, their endless hunger. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The hands released me, the darkness receded, and I was left standing in my room, alone, the silence so thick it was suffocating. I stumbled to the mirror, half expecting to see my reflection staring back at me, unchanged. But the person looking back wasn't me. Not anymore. My skin was pale, almost translucent, my eyes hollow and empty, like someone had drained the life out of them. I reached up, touching my face, and felt a chill like my own skin was as cold as ice. My mouth twisted into a smile, but it wasn't mine. It was theirs, a twisted, mocking grin that didn't belong to me. And then I heard it, faint at first, but growing louder, filling the room, echoing through my mind. You called us, and now it's your turn. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Days, weeks, maybe even months. It's hard to tell. Time doesn't feel the same anymore, like it's slipping away, fading into the shadows. I'm one of them now, part of the darkness, part of the whispers that fill the night. And every time someone reads my story, every time they feel that chill, that creeping dread, I'm there, waiting, watching, hoping they'll call out, hoping they'll answer. Because that's what they wanted all along. That's what they were waiting for. To spread, to grow, to pull more souls into the darkness, one by one, until there's nothing left but the void. So if you're reading this, if you've made it this far, take this as your warning. Don't call, don't answer, because once you do, there's no going back. You'll become one of us, just another face in the shadows, just another whisper in the dark. And someday, when someone else calls, I'll be waiting. Since that night, I feel like I've been suspended in a kind of half-life, drifting somewhere between the world of the living and whatever shadowy plane they exist on. The world I once knew is slipping away, fading into a fog that's as thick as it is dark. I no longer feel hunger or sleepiness. People pass me on the street without noticing, like I'm invisible, or maybe I just don't seem real to them anymore. And I wonder, am I? I float in this place that's nowhere and everywhere all at once. A void that seems to stretch infinitely, but feels as close as the skin I no longer recognize as my own. It's strange, this half-life, an existence that is neither fully alive nor mercifully dead. I've become part of something vast and ancient, something that has no form, yet feels more real than anything I ever knew when I was alive. The void is cold, colder than anything imaginable, but I can't feel it the way I used to. Now it's a part of me woven into every fiber of what I am, binding me to the darkness, to the other souls that hover here with me, waiting for someone to call. I don't know how long I've been here. Time has lost all meaning. Days, hours, minutes, they all blend together in this endless drift. But every so often, I feel it, a faint pull like a thread being tugged, calling me back towards something I can barely remember. I know now what it means, I know what that call is. It's someone reaching, another soul brushing against the edges of this dark plane, daring to look beyond the veil. I can feel their curiosity, their vulnerability, the faint trace of fear that only serves to deepen their connection to us. And as I drift, I feel myself being pulled closer, drawn toward the light, toward the warmth that feels like an echo of a life I no longer belong to. This time, it's a young man alone in his room, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a computer screen. I can sense his intentions before he even speaks, feel the weight of his isolation, his hunger for answers to questions he doesn't even understand. And I know, with the instinctive clarity that comes from being one with the darkness, that he's ready. He whispers into the silence, a question that trembles on the edge of his lips, as if he's unsure of what he wants to know, or maybe of what he's willing to invite into his life. I watch unseen as he hesitates, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, his eyes darting around the empty room, searching for something, anything, that might make him feel less alone. "Is anyone there?" he whispers, his voice barely more than a breath, but it reaches me as clearly as if he were standing beside me. The void stirs, hungry, responding to his call. I feel the pull intensify, drawing me closer to him, my presence slipping through the thin barrier between worlds, manifesting as a faint, chilling breeze that sends a shiver down his spine. He rubs his arms, his face paling as he glances around, sensing that he is no longer alone. "Who are you?" he whispers, his voice trembling, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. I don't answer. Not yet. I can feel his pulse, hear the blood thrumming beneath his skin, each beat inviting me closer, pulling me deeper into his world. It's intoxicating, this connection, this fragile link between us that grows stronger with every second, every breath he takes. I wait, hovering just at the edge of his awareness, letting his anticipation build, feeding off the fear that seeps into his thoughts, the tension that tightens around him like a vice. He types a message, his fingers shaking as he hits send, his eyes darting to the corners of his room, as if expecting something to appear. "Please, if anyone's there, show me." And that's all it takes. In the blink of an eye, I am there, standing just beyond the edge of his vision, a shadow that flickers in the dim light, barely visible but unmistakably real. I see him stiffen, his breath hitching, his eyes going wide as he realizes he's not alone. His gaze darts around the room, searching for the source of the chill that has settled over him, the cold that seems to seep into his bones, rooting him in place. He whispers almost to himself, "I thought I saw someone." It takes all my will to remain silent, to keep from answering him, but I know that the longer I wait, the deeper his fear will grow. And that fear, it's what binds us, what feeds the connection, what brings him closer to us. He reaches for his phone, his fingers trembling, but before he can touch it, the lights flicker, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls, shadows that seem to shift and writhe, forming shapes that are almost human but not quite. He freezes, his eyes fixed on the shadows, his breathing shallow and rapid. And then, finally, I speak. "Why did you call me?" My voice is barely more than a whisper, but it fills the room, echoing off the walls, blending with the shadows, surrounding him from every side. He spins around, his eyes wide with terror, but there's no one there. Just the empty room, the flickering lights, and the shadows that seem to close in around him. Who are you?" he stammers, his voice shaking, his hands clutching the edge of his desk, as if it's the only thing anchoring him to reality. I take a step closer, my presence slipping through the shadows, my voice a soft, mocking echo. "You called me," I say, my words filling his mind, threading through his thoughts, binding him to me. "And now you are mine." He backs away, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear that's almost tangible, like a scent in the air, something I can taste, something that fills me with a satisfaction I can't quite describe. "No," he whispers, his voice barely audible, his body trembling as he backs into the corner, his gaze darting around the room, searching for an escape. This can't be real, but it is. I am, and I am not alone. Behind me, the shadows shift, and I feel them. The others, the ones who have come before me, the ones who are now part of the darkness, part of the void. They are watching, waiting, their hollow eyes fixed on him, their twisted smiles stretching across their lifeless faces. "It's your turn," I whisper, my voice blending with theirs, a chorus of whispers that fills the room, drowning out every other sound, every thought, every hope. He tries to scream, but no sound escapes his lips. His eyes glaze over, his body going rigid as the darkness wraps around him, pulling him in, claiming him, just as it claimed me. And as he fades, as his life is drained, as he becomes one with the void, I feel a strange satisfaction, a hunger that has been momentarily sated. But I know, even as he fades into the darkness, that it won't last. The hunger will return. It always does. And so, I wait. In the void, in the silence. I wait for the next call, the next voice, the next soul foolish enough to reach into the darkness, to seek answers, to call for something they cannot control. Because once you call, there is no going back. Once you call, you are ours, forever. And we will wait, patient and hungry, drifting through the darkness, waiting for the next call, the next soul to join us, to become part of the endless, hollow void that stretches on and on and on. In the infinite stretch of darkness, time and space blend together into one seamless void, a place where souls drift and dissolve, becoming nothing more than whispers. I have no memory of my old self, of who I was or what I once loved. All that remains is the gnawing hunger, the hollow echo that fills me, and the knowledge that I am bound here, forever tethered to this place of shadows. But the pull is still there, a tugging in the emptiness that rises every so often, a connection that binds me to the living world, faint yet unmistakable. Every time someone's curiosity outweighs their fear, I feel it. And in the void, we all stir, our attention shifting toward that new spark, that faint light of a soul who has dared to seek us out. One night, as I drift in that dark suspension, I feel a stronger pull than I have ever felt before. It's different, charged with a desperate energy, a determination that I can taste even from within the depths of the void. It's raw, filled with longing, fear, but also purpose. And as it reaches out, as it breaks the thin barrier that separates their world from ours, I feel myself responding to it, pulled up and out, drawn toward that beacon of life. In an instant, I'm there, manifesting in a dimly lit room, standing in the corner where the shadows are deepest. A young woman is sitting on the edge of her bed, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She clutches a small notebook, her fingers trembling as she flips through its pages. She's reading about us. I see the words she scrawled in frantic handwriting, a collection of notes, of desperate theories, pieced together in a frantic attempt to understand what she's summoned. She's read the stories, followed the breadcrumbs, seeking answers she can't possibly understand, answers that have brought her straight to us. "Who are you?" she whispers into the darkness, her voice barely more than a breath, but it reaches me all the same. The hunger flares within me, that familiar ache that drives me forward, compels me to draw closer. But as I take a step, something pulls me back, something I can't quite place. There's a hesitation in her gaze, a flicker of something I haven't seen before. She doesn't just fear me, she pities me, and the sensation is jarring, foreign, pulling me out of the instinctive drive I've come to know so well. "Please," she whispers, her voice breaking, her eyes locked onto the shadows where I hover. "I know what you are, I know what you want, but I want to help you." I hesitate, the hollow voices of the void stirring behind me, confused, restless. This isn't how it's supposed to go. She called us. She should be trembling, pleading, begging for mercy. And yet, she looks at me with that strange pity, a glimmer of sadness that cuts through the darkness like a knife. "Help me!" The words slip from my mouth, the sound foreign, unfamiliar, as if I haven't spoken them in 1,000 lifetimes. She nods, taking a shaky breath, and I can feel her resolve strengthen, a warmth radiating from her that clashes with the cold emptiness surrounding me. It stirs something deep within, a feeling I thought I'd long forgotten, something that doesn't belong in the void. "Please," she says again, her voice barely a whisper. "If you tell me how, if there's a way, maybe I can free you." The shadows around us flicker, shifting uneasily. I feel the others watching, their empty eyes narrowing, their whispers rising in a low hum, a chorus of anger, of resentment. They don't want freedom. They don't even understand it anymore. We are bound here, held together by the darkness, by the hunger, by the endless cycle that has consumed us for centuries. But her words, they reach a part of me I thought was gone, a part that remembers the light, the warmth, the life I once had. "There is no freedom," I murmur, my voice wavering, the words thick and heavy. "We are bound by the call. Once you call us, there's no going back." She shakes her head, her grip tightening on the notebook. "But you were human once, weren't you? You weren't always this." The void stirs, a chill rippling through me as the memories rise, fragmented and blurred, like images seen through cracked glass. I remember flashes, a life, a name, moments that once meant something, but now feel like echoes from a dream. I remember calling them, thinking I could control it, thinking I could escape the darkness. But it claimed me, hollowed me, and left me as nothing more than a shadow in the void. "There must be a way," she insists, her voice trembling but determined. "If you can remember who you were, maybe you can break free." I feel the other voices pressing against me, a chorus of resentment and despair, pulling me back, reminding me of the hunger, of the emptiness that binds us. They don't want freedom. They only want to consume, to pull others into the void, to feed the cycle that has kept us here for centuries. But her voice is like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness, grounding me in a way I haven't felt in an eternity. "Please," she whispers, her eyes pleading. "Remember?" And in that moment, something shifts. The memories come flooding back. My name, my life, the moment I first called them, thinking I could control it. I remember the fear, the desperation, the regret that filled me as the darkness closed in, claiming me, consuming me. And as I look into her eyes, I realize that I don't have to let the cycle continue. I don't have to be a part of this darkness anymore. With a strength I didn't know I still had, I reach out, my hand trembling as I touch her shoulder, the warmth of her skin grounding me, pulling me back into myself. And in that moment, I feel something break, a chain snapping, a weight lifting from my soul. The void trembles, the shadows recoiling, the voices fading into a distant hum. The hunger, the emptiness, it's still there, but it's weaker, fading, like a flame being snuffed out. I can feel the darkness loosening its grip, the endless pull of the void weakening, as I reclaim the pieces of myself that I thought were lost. "Thank you," I whisper, my voice filled with a gratitude I never thought I'd feel again. You saved me." She nods, tears in her eyes, relief and sadness mingling as she watches the shadows dissolve, the darkness lifting, leaving only the faintest trace of cold behind. I know now that I am free, that I've broken the cycle, that I no longer belong to the void. But as I fade, as I feel myself slipping away, I know there is still one last thing I must do. I turn to her, my gaze steady, my voice calm as I give her the one piece of advice that can keep her safe, that can protect her from the darkness that almost claimed me. Never call out, I say, my words soft but firm. Never seek the void. Once you call, There is no going back. She nods, her face pale but resolute, understanding the weight of my warning, the truth behind it. And as I fade, as I dissolve into the warmth and light, I feel a sense of peace, a sense of closure that I thought I'd never know. I am free, finally, truly free. And as the last remnants of the void slip away, as the shadows fade into nothingness, I know that the cycle has been broken. The darkness no longer has a hold on me, no longer has a claim to my soul. And for the first time in an eternity, I am at peace.
Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the unknown. If this story left you with goosebumps or a lingering sense of dread, then you're exactly where you need to be. There's so much more to uncover, and each tale gets darker, more terrifying, and closer to the truth than the last. So, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Brace yourself for more real-life horror stories that will keep you up at night. Stay curious, stay cautious, and I'll see you in the next tale if you dare.